In this video, we're going to talk about how to make a card once you have data set up in the server. In the last video, we created the necessary data structures and GraphQL queries and everything in order to do docking and shuttle bays. Now that we have that taken care of, we're going to create a card for the front end that is going to match the data that we created in the back end. So the first thing I'm going to do is go here to the SRC folder. Inside this folder is literally everything for the front end. It loads in app.js from the beginning and then loads app from there, which loads up all of the necessary components and creates the connection to GraphQL. And then components is where most of the action is going to happen. In the views folder, we have all of our cards. So each of these cards is named and can do whatever we want with those. I have a template card right here, so I'm going to copy that and we'll just paste that in here and rename it to be shuttles. Awesome. So the nice thing about this template is it sets up literally everything that I need with my query and subscription. So all I have to do is just rename everything. So I'm going to do a couple of quick find and replace. I'm going to change template to shuttle there, and I'm going to change template like that to shuttles like that. Okay, awesome. Now I need to get my GraphQL data. So I'm going to come over here, make sure that my server started up, and then open up the graphical. And I just want to get a query that will get everything that I need. So query shuttles, I'll fix that in a minute. And it's called docking, that's what we made. And it takes either an ID, a simulator ID, or a type, and/or. In this case, we're going to take a simulator ID, so we'll use the query variable notation to do this. And then we also want the type, and this one's going to be static, just shuttle. Just to make sure I got that right, I'll search in my documentation for docking types, and shuttle bay is actually what it is. So I'll do that. Okay, and now I can put my query variables up here. This is an ID, and then type. Or we don't have to worry about type because that is what it is. I don't know how to do an input. Do I just have to do it like that? Oh, that's all that it needs. Cool. You learn something new every day. Apparently, if you're using an enum as a type, you don't have to put quotes around it. So that's cool. Okay, now I need to put in all the information that I need from the docking GraphQL endpoint. So I'm going to first get an ID. I like to just put the number. When I'm working in graphical, just a number so that I can go through all of these different entries, I guess. So name, I'm not going to worry about type, and then we'll get clamps, ramps, doors, image, docked, and damage. And then damage, if I hit this start button, it's just going to throw in all of the fields there. All that I want to know is if it's damaged though, so I'll clear all that out. Awesome, so that gives me all of that. I copy that and I can paste it down here with my shuttle query. And I already have my simulator ID there, so we're in good shape. Then I can also paste it up here with my subscription, changing this here to subscription, changing this to shuttles update, and changing this to docking update. So that's the correct name of the subscription itself. Okay, down here it already has the variables in place, which is convenient. Here I just need to match it up with the data. So down here it's a docking that I'm updating, and then here the data that I'm pulling out is docking update. So let me explain that a little bit. With the subscription, it's going to receive an update from the server, and as soon as it receives an update from the server, it's going to run this update query method. it receives the previous results which it got from this query down here, and it's also going to receive the subscription data, which is the data that we're getting from this subscription query. Okay? Then we need to merge it together without modifying it. So React and GraphQL require immutability, immutable data structures, which means we can't change previous results in place. Instead, we have to return an entirely new object that has the correct information inside of it. So here, since the subscription data is going to be a very similar data structure to the previous results and the docking property on previous results, I can just replace it wholesale and it'll be just fine. So I just access my data here and create an object with docking there. So that's going to create an object that can replace it. And then when you do object.assign, what it does is it takes the first property, the first argument, and that takes the next argument and plops that on top of it, and then it takes the next argument and plops that on top of it. And so doing this all together is going to create a new object, put the previous results on top of that, and then put my docking object on top of that, which will overwrite the docking object in previous results. Awesome. So we've got that. I'll change the class name there, and actually I'm going to import a couple of components from React-Strap, which just is an abstraction layer for React and Bootstrap 4. We'll start with that and we'll get more as we go. There we go. So there's that. And now that should be all. If I save this, nothing's going to happen because I'm not importing it yet. So I need to come down here to the index.js and import it. Right here, import shuttles from shuttles. And I need to capitalize that. And then I need to export it down here. And then also I have a list file. This might change in the future, but for right now the list file is there and is just the list of all the cards. Okay, so now I should be able to come here and go to my debug and find shuttles. And oh, it's broken. Let's see how it's broken. The layout curves, or layout corners, excuse me, layout requires that every card has its own icon. Now, because I'm lazy, I'm not going to create an icon right now. I'll make one in the future. But in order to circumvent this, I'll just go into the layout corners, the icons, and I'll duplicate one of these icons, and just to make sure that it's obvious, I'll do probe control. So I duplicate that, change this to shuttles, the name of the card, and then once it refreshes, it should load, and there it is. This is a template. If I go in here, I can see that it did make a GraphQL call or two. There's my docking data, and there's nothing there because I haven't put in any test data. So let's create some test data really quick. I'll come here to graphical, and I created a mutation for creating a shuttle bay. So docking, create docking port, and this just takes a single object. So let me make sure I get this right. Actually, I'll do it like this. We'll do shuttle bay alpha, and actually I'm not going to call it shuttle bay alpha, I'll just call it alpha. And then the type is going to be, actually, since I now know that trick about the enums, I can change that, but I'm not going to worry about that quite yet. Image is going to be default, clamp, stocked. Yeah, we'll just leave that like that and call it good. And then let's do another mutation. We'll just create 3 of these, actually 4 of them, because that'll be more symmetrical. So alpha, bravo, Charlie, and delta. Why are these? Oh, no, I can't do that quite yet. I'll have to do it in 3 or 4 separate things. Also, I'm forgetting I need to put on the simulator ID. The debug mode uses the simulator ID of test with lowercase test. So now I can run this mutation. That'll create that docking port, and then I'll do Bravo. And then Charlie and Delta. Awesome. And if I do shuttles, it'll show me all of those. Great. There's one more thing that needs to be taken care of, and that is creating the docking images. So suppose I've got an awesome image here of a shuttle. I'm going to upload that really quick. So I'm going to go to the configure generic assets, and I need to create a new folder. And just to be clear, my folder is called docking images. So I will create a new folder, docking images, and then I'll come in here and create a new one, and we'll call this default. And we'll just use this, not that image, this image here. And there it is, got uploaded, we're good to go. One thing though, you want to make sure if you're in development mode, which we're in right now, that whenever you make a change like this that you want to persist across refreshes of the server, you create a snapshot. I don't have an easy way to do this right now, so you just have to run the GraphQL mutation snapshot, and that'll take care of it for you. So now my shuttles are saved, my image is saved, and so I should be able to work on this card and have them show up. So let's create a quick little component. This is in React. So if you don't know React, you're going to want to brush up on it pretty quick. Change that really quick. So the first thing I'm going to do is create an isolated component for displaying a single shuttle bay. Okay. So let me go const shuttle bay equals, and it's going to take props, and it's going to render something. I'm going to use some more React strap. We'll create an individual card for each of these, and I'll use the card block component as well. So if I come in here, I'll just return card like that, and then we'll throw in a card block like that, and I want to put an image at the top, but I want to make sure that I load the correct image based on the asset key that's being passed here in this image. So for that, I'm going to use a helper. This helper is found in the helpers folder here. It's called assets. So let me import that really quick. Import asset, just asset like that, from and just to make sure that worked, I'll save it, and it should appear. Maybe, maybe not. Doesn't look like I put enough dots on there. There we go. So that got it. So this just does a GraphQL query to load the asset from the server and replaces the source. Let me show you how it works. It's a component, so I'm going to have to put asset here, and then it takes a prop called asset key, and for that I'm just going to do image there. Okay, and it's what's called a function as children, which means instead of putting in instead of putting React components in there, I'm going to put in a function, and that function is going to have the image source as its parameter, and it's going to return something. In this case, it's going to return React, and its source is going to be the source that is run. So this looks kind of funky, but it actually makes a lot of sense. What this does is it takes the function, it evaluates it, and then it evaluates, it evaluates it with whatever the value of the component is. Does that make sense? I hope so. So here, this component is going to get the image source from GraphQL, and then it's going to run this function and return it, which is going to output this image. I'm also going to set draggable to false. Just so that you can't drag it around. Okay. Then here I'm going to put name, and I'll put that up here. And then the clamps, ramps, and doors I'm not going to worry about right now. All that I want is if there's something there or not. So actually I think I'm going to shift this around a bit. I'll put the asset down here, but that's only going to appear if docked is true. So just use that self short circuit thing. Okay, so now I have this shuttle bay component. It's very simple. It's not finished yet, but I want to test to make sure that it's working. So how about we come in here, and I'm going to make it so that we get the docking from data easily. So const docking equals this.props.data. So now I can access all of the docked things. And down here, I'll do some of this. I'll do docking.map to loop over it. And that's a function. And it's going to return something, in this case, React. I'll use some of that. In React, you have to make sure you put a key. So I'm going to make that be the ID of the docking, because that's always going to be unique. And then I can use my component that I created down here. Yeah, like that. And I'm going to use the spread operator. What this does is it takes all of the properties, the object properties of D, and it turns them into props on my React component. So there's that. I save it, and now this is going to reload, and there it is. It looks like I have a breakpoint there too, which is kind of annoying. Really annoying. Want to get rid of that breakpoint. Yeah, we'll just do that. Somewhere there's something wrong going on. I'll just close that. Okay, so you can see here we've got all of those. For whatever reason, it isn't loading my image properly. Let's check it out. Looks like it has some bad requests. So we'll go into the network tab and we'll test it out. And it's throwing those errors again. Yay. But if we come here, we can see that the bad request is coming from this. And I can't tell what the response is, but it's not good. So let's see what's going wrong. I think it's probably having to do with the asset loading. So if I come here, it looks like the prop is good. But I need to put a simulator ID, maybe? Yeah, looks like I need to put a simulator ID. It's a required prop. So I'll come down here and say simulator ID equals simulator ID. And then I just need to make sure that the shuttle bay gets the simulator as a prop. So this.props.simulator.id, which is the same thing that I'm using down here to get the simulator ID for that first GraphQL query. It loads, and okay, I just fixed a bug that made the asset break, and so now it looks like it's loading maybe properly. I'm not seeing that image though for some reason. It's because instead of returning just a string, source returns an object. So I want to do that, destructure it, and then ta-da! Awesome, that looks so good. So now I need to have some kind of indicator. Well, first things first, I need to, I'm trying to decide how I want to do this. I need to make it so that when the image isn't present, that it still retains its height so that it doesn't change sizes if the image isn't there or not, or if the images are different sizes. I want it to look the same, have the same basic layout. Secondly, I'm also going to want to make it so that it has the buttons for detaching the docking clamps, the boarding ramps, and the airlock, or rather the doors. And finally, I'm going to want to make it so that it sends those messages to the GraphQL server and updates accordingly, plus a few other things that need to be done. So I think I'm going to pause this for right now, and then we'll jump back in as soon as I've done some of these styling changes to show you how the GraphQL mutations work. So when I left you, we had just taken care of getting the layout mostly put together and figuring out a couple of things off camera so that I don't have to waste your time. So now let me show you what I've done so far, and then we can move on to creating some mutations and using those to update information in the database. So here's what it looks like now. I've got my shuttles and I've got my buttons here on the side, and the shuttles are now fitting nicely inside of their space regardless of the size which they are. And then I have 3 animations that I've created. One of them's reused. It's the detach clamps, and it's going to move those together and pull them up. And this is using internal state on the client for when it shows it and not. For decompressing the shuttle bay, it's going to just sparkle away like a fizzle fade effect. And then the doors is just going to move that door up. And the cool thing is the doors on all of these have numbers because it's SVG, so that's pretty slick. So yeah, that's that. So let me move into taking care of the mutations for those. Remember, the mutation that we created is pretty generic. It's just going to take care of everything for us. So I'll write the mutation here in graphical. Update shuttle bay, and I'll add the variables later, and then docking port update, and it just takes a port object, and that's going to be my variable there. Okay, super easy. So then port is going to be a docking port input, right, with a bang, and that's that. So let's make sure that we get this correct. I don't want to mess up what it is. It has to have an ID, and then in our case, it's just going to have the clamps, compress, and doors, whatever it is that we're changing here. So let me come down here to my shuttles. So here's our shuttles, and here is, right here is the toggle shuttle button, and it's just going to get an ID and a which. Awesome. So here, I can delete that. This is going to take care of showing whichever thing needs to be animating, and also making it so that the buttons are disabled and that sort of thing. I'm going to add a little bit more of that logic later, but for right now we'll just worry about the mutation. And now I need to create a different mutation for, well actually no, it's going to be the same mutation for each. So let's just take this mutation, and every mutation needs to be wrapped in a GraphQL string function, a template string function. It's really nifty. You just write it like that, and then the GraphQL query goes in there, and it runs a special function on it to make it fancy and work and stuff. Then I have my variables, which is going to be different for everything. So the one thing that's going to be the same is the ID. So I'll just stick that in there, and then I'll update it here with whatever thing we're changing, clamps, compress, or doors. In this case, variables which is going to be the opposite of whatever it is now. So this dot, actually, I'm going to come down here. In my render, I'm pulling out a bunch of stuff. Oh, it's just right there in this dot props. So this dot props which, and I'm going to invert that. Okay, and that should be all that we need to do. We've got the ID, we've got the variables, we're good to go. So, in fact, I'm going to, well, no, that's just fine. All that I need to do now is actually activate it. To do this, I have to use a special thing that's passed into props called the client. the client is injected with this higher order component here. It's called with Apollo, and that higher order component injects this client, which gives me direct access to the GraphQL client. That's being injected into the shuttles component, not the shuttle bay component, so I need to pass it to the shuttle bay component. So now that I have that there, I can come down here and say this.props.client.mutate, and it takes an object with a couple of keys. The two keys that we're going to worry about is mutation and variables. And when I pass it in like that, it expands it out into the proper object notation. It's just fancy syntactic sugar. And that's all that I need to do to trigger this mutation. I write the mutation up here, I put in the variables, and then I do this.props.client.mutate, and that takes care of it for me. So let's check and make sure that this works. I'm going to open up my Dev Inspector and pull open the Network tab here. And as I click these, we should be able to see the GraphQL mutations get sent out. So if I do that, oh, it looks like there's a problem. Awesome. Apparently it can't find the client. So let me double check here. Client. Oh, it's because I passed it to the bottom one, but not the top one. Because I only have 4 shuttles in my shuttle bay, I just duplicated it. But I'm going to get rid of that code in just a minute. Okay, so now if I click this, my breakpoint runs, and then it throws an error for some reason. So let's check out what the error is. Go to something, a bad request. Oh, hang on, here's what's wrong. Variable port of required type docking port input was not provided. So what I did is in my variables, instead of saying port, I just said the thing, which is not right. So what I need to do is change this to port, and then variables is going to be an object with port inside of it. There we go. That's all that we need. So now if I come here, refresh that, and hit that, it plays our animation, which means that our GraphQL mutation went through properly, returned nothing, but we know that it returned properly because our WebSocket, which we have right here, if I browse through the frames here, we've got this docking update that tells us that there was an update to one of the docking ports for the clamps to be false. Okay, and now I can do decompress bay, and that causes the animation to run, and then open doors, and that causes the animation to run there too. I just love this too. You can see, oh, you can't see, but it's got the stars in the background. So now I need to do a couple of other things. I need to make it so that it changes the labels on the buttons based on the state. I need to make it so that if the doors are open, you cannot compress the shuttle bay. Completely impossible. I need to do a little bit more to make sure that images swap properly and whatnot, but that's basically the gist of creating the client-side application. Most of what you're going to be doing is just straight up React, and as long as you're skilled at React and can figure out some of those things, it should work just fine for you. Yeah, that's it.